Montana Territory, June 1882. The train hissed into the small pine-fringed station at Dry Creek, its iron wheels scraping across the rails like it had no intention of stopping. Smoke curled into the bright blue sky, and when the engine groaned to a halt, Susanna Shepard stepped down with trembling hands and a heart heavier than the carpetbag by her side. Her boots hit the dusty platform, and she blinked against the sudden brightness. She had not expected it to feel so quiet out here, like the world had taken a long breath and was waiting to see what she would do next. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The wire correspondence in her pocket was folded neatly, her last name written wrong, but the promise behind it was clear. I'll meet you at the station. I'll be the one wearing the brown hat. Q.C. There were only a few men waiting. One was older and missing a tooth. Another had eyes too sharp and lingered too long. But just past them stood a tall man with dust on his boots and a brown hat tilted low. He held the reins of a chestnut mare, and when their eyes met, he offered a quiet, careful smile. That smile did something to her. It reached past the fear in her chest. The uncertainty wrapped around her ribs like a band, and loosened it. She had spent the entire train ride gripping her courage like a lifeline. Now, just seeing that gentle curve of his lips, it felt like maybe she could breathe again. He stepped forward. You must be Susanna. She gave a small nod, fingers clutched around her carpetbag handle. Yes, and you are Quentin Calloway. He tipped his hat, his voice low and warm. You came a long way. I did, she said, her voice catching, all the way from Missouri. He looked at her a moment longer, then reached for her bag. Let's get you out of this sun. She hesitated, then handed it to him. Thank you. They walked toward the waiting wagon. She caught a glimpse of the mountains in the distance, softened by summer haze. The land was wide, open, and quiet. It scared her. But when Quentin helped her up into the seat, his touch steady and light, she felt a little less alone. The wagon wheels rolled over the dry road, dust rising behind them. Quentin glanced at her. I know this is not easy. No, she said softly. It is not. They rode in silence after that, but it was not the kind that hurt. It was the kind that settled. His ranch sat about a half-hour outland that rolled into soft hills, golden grass waving in the breeze, a small creek winding near the edge. The house was simple, wood slats and a stone chimney, smoke curling from it. A barn stood nearby, and a few chickens scattered when the wagon rolled in. He stopped the team, then turned to her. I can show you around, or you can rest first, whatever you need. She looked at the house, then at him. Maybe a minute to sit, he nodded. Of course. He helped her down from the wagon, and for a moment their hands lingered. She looked up at him, and his eyes, light hazel with gold in them, were kind. Real. Not the empty charm of city men. He was not trying to impress her. He was just trying. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and wood smoke. The kitchen was clean, the hearth warm. A single chair was drawn close to it. She set her bag down and stood near the fire, unsure what to say. He poured her a tin cup of water and handed it to her. Thank you, she said quietly. You hungry? Not yet. He nodded again and leaned against the doorway. You do not have to decide anything today. You can stay as long as you need. If you decide this is not what you want, the next train comes through in 2 weeks. She looked at him sharply. You would not be angry? No, ma'am, he said simply. I want this to be your choice, same as mine. That surprised her more than anything. She sat down slowly, the cup warm in her hands. I was not sure who would meet me, she admitted. I have heard stories about men who send for brides and treat them like property. He reached up and scratched the back of his neck. I suppose some do. But I sent for you because I was tired of eating alone, coming home to silence. I do not want a servant, I want a partner. She looked at him again. That same smile was there, quiet, cautious, but real, and suddenly her throat tightened. I think I would like to stay, she said. His shoulders eased. All right. That night he gave her the bedroom and slept in the loft above the barn. She found a nightgown folded at the foot of the bed, freshly laundered, likely by his sister before she left for Idaho last winter. The sheets smelled like sun and soap. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind outside and the rustle of leaves. Then she thought of his smile again, how it had made her feel seen, not just looked at. Like she mattered. By morning, she was downstairs before dawn, helping boil water. He came in from the barn, hair damp from the pump, and paused when he saw her. "You did not have to wake early." "I wanted to," she said. They moved around the kitchen together, quiet again, but something softer hanging between them now. She handed him a cup of coffee. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away. He smiled again, less cautious this time, a little closer to ease. She smiled back. Neither of them said anything about it. They did not need to. Later that day, he showed her the garden, the coop, the stream where she could wash clothes. She listened closely, asked questions. He watched her, patient, like he was learning too. That evening, after supper, they sat on the porch. The sun lowered behind the hills, turning the sky peach and gold. She pulled her shawl close, and he offered his coat without a word. She slipped it over her shoulders and looked at him. "I was scared, coming here, I know. But I am not anymore," he turned to her. "Good." They watched the stars come out, quiet and steady, and when she turned her face toward him, he looked back and smiled. It was not cautious this time, and it melted what little fear she had left. The next morning broke slow and golden, light slipping through the thin curtains like it knew not to rush her. Susanna stood at the basin in the corner of her room, brushing out the last of her dark hair, her fingers catching on a knot near the ends. She hadn't worn it loose in years, but something about the wind the day before had made her want to feel it again, unbound and touched by air that hadn't passed through a chimney. She tied it back in a low twist and stepped out into the main room. The fire had been stoked already. A kettle hissed gently, and the scent of cornmeal mingled with something meatier, salt pork, maybe. She followed the smell to the kitchen, where Quentin stood with his back to her, sleeves rolled, skillet in hand. "I can take care of that," she said. He glanced over his shoulder. "You're up earlier than I expected." "I couldn't sleep past the birds." He nodded toward the table. "Sit. I'll plate it." She watched him finish the eggs, careful with the pan, not hurried, like he'd done this 100 times and never minded. When he set the plate in front of her, she noticed the toast was crisped at the edges and the butter had started to melt into the eggs. "Did you cook for yourself all this time?" she asked. "I did. No woman before me." There was one. She looked up, surprised at the ease with which he said it. She passed. "2 winters ago, I'm sorry." He stirred sugar into his coffee. "She was kind, quiet like you, but different too, liked to pick fights with the rooster. Used to say there's no sense in keeping a bird that hates you." Susanna smiled despite herself. "And yet the rooster's still here. He wins more than he loses." She glanced down at her plate. "I wouldn't have minded if you hadn't told me. I figured you'd rather know." "I would," she said, softer now. "Folks back home didn't think much of women who married widowers, like we were getting a man secondhand." "That's foolishness," he said plainly. "We all come from somewhere before here." She studied him a moment. "You ever think about leaving this place?" He shook his head. "This land's been in my family since before the war. My father cleared the first pasture with a borrowed mule and a busted shoulder. I ain't much for cities." "Don't like the noise." "I don't either," she said. "Too many people watching, not enough seeing." He looked up then, and their eyes held. After breakfast, she followed him to the shed behind the barn. A rack of tools hung beside the door, and he handed her a pair of worn gloves. "Fence lines sagging near the south pasture. I'll show you how I set posts. You want me to help, only if you want to learn." She nodded once, tugging the gloves on. They walked the fence line in silence, boots crunching over dry grass until they reached a dip where the wire had gone slack. He knelt and pulled back the wooden post, showing her how the soil had given way. She crouched beside him, watching as he drove a new stake into firmer earth with calm, practiced rhythm. "Do you ever get tired out here?" she asked. "All the time." "Then why stay?" He straightened, brushing dust from his hands. "Because at the end of the day, I know every nail, every stone out here was put there by someone who cared what happened to it." Susanna looked out across the pasture. A hawk circled above, casting a brief shadow over the field. "I think I'd like to care about something like that," she said. Back at the house, she washed up first, scrubbing the grit from her arms and face at the pump. When she came inside, he was already seated, sharpening a blade with long, even strokes. She watched him from the doorway. "My father was a blacksmith," she said. "He used to make his own hunting knives." He looked up. "You ever learn his trade?" "No." He didn't think girls should hold hammers. Quentin set the blade down. "That's a waste of good hands." I used to sneak into his shop when he was gone, tried shaping scrap iron once, burned 2 fingers. My ma said it served me right. He leaned back in the chair slightly. Still, you tried. She stepped further into the room. I wasn't allowed to do much else. My brother got the farm, I got a sewing kit and a promise I'd marry someone respectable. When I said I'd rather find my own way, they stopped writing. Quentin didn't offer pity. He just nodded, slow and understanding. My kin scattered. After the war, none of us had much left to say. She sat across from him, hands folded in her lap. It's strange, isn't it? How quiet can feel like company with the right person. I know what you mean. That evening, she wandered to the edge of the creek while he finished mending the barn door. The sun filtered through the cottonwoods, and the water moved slow and clear over rounded stones. She crouched and dipped her fingers in, letting the chill bite. Behind her, Quentin approached, boots soft in the grass. He didn't say anything, just stood beside her and looked out over the water. "You think we'll fit?" she asked, voice low. "I think we already started to," he said. She turned toward him, the last of the sun catching the line of his jaw. "What if I don't know how to be a wife?" "I don't need a wife," he said. "I need someone who wants to be here, with me." She looked down at her hands, then back up. "I think I do." He reached for her hand, not sudden, not unsure, just steady, and when she laced her fingers through his, the world felt a little more certain. The rain came unexpectedly 3 days after Susanna arrived, sweeping across the valley in a low hush, soaking the earth and turning the dust to clay. By late afternoon, the clouds hung low and the light dimmed to a pewter gray. Susanna stood barefoot just inside the barn, hem of her dress damp from the walk through the grass, watching Quentin secure the last of the feed bags before the storm set in for good. "You always know when it's coming?" she asked, voice soft beneath the patter of rain on the roof. He tested the rope one last time, then turned toward her. "The air smells different, heavier, like it's warning you." She stepped closer, brushing her fingers across the rough edge of a stall door. "I never could tell the difference. Back home, storms just came when they pleased. This one's slow, won't break anything, just wants to be listened to." She tilted her head. "You talk about weather like it's a person. Out here, it might as well be." He motioned toward the loft ladder. "Come on." "Dry her up there." She followed him, her footfalls careful on the rungs. At the top, the loft opened wide, filled with stacked hay and the smell of cedar and dust. He cleared a space near the back wall where the wind couldn't reach. They sat without speaking for a long minute, backs against the wood, knees drawn up. Rain drummed steady above them, and the wind spoke through the gaps in the boards. He rubbed one palm slowly over his thigh. "I was 17 when I first patched this roof. Thought I was smarter than the carpenter my father hired. Got up there alone, nailed shingles crooked, split half of them by the time I was done. You learn the right way after. No, I fell clean through and landed in the trough. The carpenter found me half soaked and stuck between 2 planks. He never said a word, just handed me another hammer." She smiled, resting her hands in her lap. "You've lived on this land your whole life." "I have. Ever wanted something that wasn't here?" He glanced sideways. "Yes," the quiet stretched. Then he added, "But not in a long while." She picked at a stray thread on her sleeve. "I keep thinking about how many choices I didn't get to make, where to live, who to love, what to keep." "You're here now," he said. "That was yours." She turned to face him fully. "I didn't know what I'd find. What kind of man would be waiting? I told myself I could leave if something felt wrong. I'd never keep you if it did." "I know," she said. "You haven't looked at me like I owe you anything. That's the first time in a long while a man's made me feel safe." He didn't thank her. He didn't shift uncomfortably or try to explain himself. He just looked at her steady and sure and said, "I want you to feel safe and strong. I want both." The barn settled around them with the sound of rain deepening, a low song that filled the space between their voices. She leaned back against the wall again. "My mother used to read me stories when I was small, about women who crossed the country to build something new. They always ended in a house with curtains and a baby in someone's arms." He tipped his head slightly. "You want that. I want a life that feels like mine. If there's curtains, fine. If there's a child, I'd raise it to be kind. But mostly, I want to wake up beside someone who doesn't expect me to be smaller than I am." He was quiet for a second, then said, I never liked stories where the women were just waiting for someone to save them. Neither did I. Outside, thunder rolled far off. In here, it was warm, dry, and full of something unspoken but growing. He reached for her hand, not with urgency but with the same quiet care he showed the land, the horses, the tools passed down through his family. She let him take it, her fingers curling into his without hesitation. His thumb brushed once across her knuckle. "I don't need a story," she said, "just something real." "You have that," he said, no louder than the rain, "if you'll keep it." She didn't answer with words. She just leaned her shoulder into his, her head resting lightly against him, and he let her. No claiming, no questions. Just a place to rest that wasn't borrowed. When the rain eased near sunset, they climbed down the ladder together. She walked beside him back to the house, her skirts damp again, her boots heavy with mud. But her step was sure, and her eyes didn't drift toward the distance anymore. Inside, she lit the oil lamp while he set wood in the stove. The fire caught slow, and the first glow of evening warmed the kitchen walls. He stood, brushing off his hands. "You hungry?" She turned toward him, a quiet certainty in her voice. "Let me cook tonight." He hesitated, then nodded once. "All right." She pulled the apron from its hook and tied it around her waist, sleeves pushed past her elbows. The rhythm of chopping, mixing, stirring came back faster than she expected, like her hands remembered something her heart had forgotten. He sat nearby, one leg crossed over the other, watching her with a stillness that didn't press. After they ate, she cleaned the pans while he dried the plates. The lamp burned low, casting shadows on the walls, and her voice broke the silence. "Do you think you'll ever leave this place?" "No," he said. "Not unless you ask me to." She turned to him, towel in hand, heart steady. "I wouldn't." He stepped closer, his fingers brushing her wrist as he took the plate. "Then I'll stay." The room held them in that moment, two people no longer standing at the edge of something uncertain but stepping into it together, quietly, without ceremony. She reached up, her palm resting lightly against his shoulder. He didn't move until she did, and when she leaned in, he met her halfway. The kiss was soft and still, a breath drawn in together and not let go. Outside, the last of the storm passed, and the wind carried the scent of wet earth through the open window. Inside, the lamp flickered, and for the first time in a long while, neither of them felt alone. The first letter arrived by horseback courier 4 days after the rain. Quentin found it tucked beneath the sourdough starter jar on the porch, the envelope still damp around the edges. He didn't open it right away. Just held it in one hand, thumb resting on the broken wax seal while the morning sun skimmed over the barn roof. Susanna noticed it when she came out with the wash basket. "From town, my cousin sent it. He's working the cattle trail near Bozeman." Quentin glanced at her, then handed it over. "You want to read it?" She wiped her hands on her apron and accepted it without hesitation, slipping a finger under the flap. "Only if you don't mind. It's just trail talk. He writes like he's afraid silence will catch up to him." She smiled, eyes scanning the page. "Says here he tangled with a water snake and lost boots in the river." "That sounds like him." She folded it carefully and set it on the windowsill. "Does he ever visit?" "Not since last spring." "He's not one for staying in one place." She nodded and turned toward the line where the sheets tugged in the breeze. "I used to think moving meant progress. Now I'm not so sure." Quentin stepped down from the porch and joined her beside the line. He reached for a corner of the cotton sheet and pressed the clothespin tight. Some things only grow when they're given time in one soil. She didn't answer right away. "Then, I started a journal, just a few sentences a night. I don't know what I'm trying to keep yet. But it feels worth the ink." He looked at her, then down at the laundry. "You want a desk, I can build one." "I'd like that," she said. "Not right away, just when you have time. I've got time." Later that week, a stranger rode up the trail, hat low and coat dusty from the road. Susanna spotted him through the kitchen window while shelling peas. She straightened, wiped her hands, and stepped outside just as Quentin came in from the barn. The man pulled up his gelding and tipped his hat. "Calloway, that's me." The man dismounted, glancing once toward Susanna but not lingering. "Your heifer was found near the south ridge. Looks like she slipped the fence." Quentin's brow creased, still alive, spooked and limping. "My boys penned her for you. I'll come by in the morning. The man nodded, then turned to leave. Before mounting, he paused. Didn't know you'd taken on a woman. I did. The man looked between them again, this time longer. You picked well. Susanna didn't flinch, but she didn't smile either. When the man rode off, she turned to Quentin. You get that kind of talk often? Not when I'm alone. She crossed her arms gently. He didn't mean harm, but I'm not stock to be praised. No, Quentin said. You're not. She looked at him, then softened. Thank you. That evening, he walked the pasture fence while she mended the hem of his work shirt by lamplight. When he returned, she was still seated at the table, needle moving with quiet precision. You sew like you've done it for others, he said as he set his gloves aside. I did. A tailor in Independence hired me for a time. I never liked the measuring. Too many hands, too many eyes. You like it better now. I don't mind mending something that belongs to a man who sees me as more than the stitches. He pulled out the chair beside her, but didn't sit right away. You want to keep doing that kind of work. Not for trade, she said, but I'd like to make things that last. Clothes, quilts, maybe teach someone else one day, he nodded. Then we'll need more needles. Their eyes met across the table. She set the shirt down and pressed her hand over his. I've been thinking, she said. About spring, we could plant beans along the west fence. It gets good light. He turned his palm upward beneath hers. You want a garden. I want something that comes back every year, even if winter's hard. He closed his fingers gently around hers. Then we'll plant it. The lamp flickered low, and outside the wind shifted warm. The house felt solid around them, not just shelter, but joined purpose. She stood first, their hands parting without rush. You should sleep. You've got to fetch that heifer come morning. He lingered a heartbeat longer before rising. I'll be back before noon. When he crossed the threshold to the porch, she followed him to the door. Neither of them spoke again. They didn't need to. The night air was still, and the stars had come out clear. She watched him walk to the barn, his silhouette quiet against the darkening sky. And when she turned back inside, she carried the warmth of his hand with her, tucked deep into the place where fear had once lived. The heifer limped into the pasture just before midday, Quentin walking beside her with slow patience, reins slung over one shoulder, his coat dusted from the ride. Susanna watched from the back garden as he guided the animal through the open gate, his hand resting lightly on her flank until she found her footing and moved toward the water trough. He didn't look toward the house right away, but she saw the way his shoulders settled once the gate was latched. She wiped her palms on her apron and came down the slope, the soft loam clinging to the soles of her boots. She'll favor that leg for a while, he said, glancing at her. She's lucky to have someone walk beside her instead of riding ahead. He gave a single nod, then looked out across the pasture, the wind lifting the ends of his hair. On the way back, I passed the old Atwood place, roofs caved in. Porch gave out. I remember you said the family moved east. They did, left everything behind. It looked like ghosts were living in the walls. She rested her hand against the fence rail. You ever think about how something can fall apart just from being left alone? He looked at her. Yes. They stood in the quiet for a while, the breeze carrying the scent of the wet grass, a faint hum of bees in the distance. I want to build something that doesn't get left behind, she said finally. He turned toward her, his voice low. You already are. That evening, Quentin brought in a bundle of cedar boards and a set of chisels wrapped in linen. He laid them on the table without a word. Susanna touched the smooth grain with her fingertips, her eyes searching his face. I'll need to cut a few more pieces, he said. But I can start the desk tomorrow. She stepped around the table close enough that her skirt brushed his leg. You remembered. You said you wanted a place to write. She reached for his hand, not gently, not shyly, just with the same steadiness he'd always given her. You listen with your whole self, she said, I try. And you give without asking what you'll get. His thumb brushed along the back of her hand, slow and sure. You've given too, don't think I haven't felt it. She leaned into him then, her forehead resting against his chest. He wrapped one arm around her, the other resting at her waist, and they stood there, the room dim around them, the warmth between them needing no words. 3 weeks passed, the days unfolding in rhythm, mornings tending the early vegetables, afternoons mending tack or cutting wood, evenings shared over food and quiet talk. The desk took shape in the corner of the parlor. its surface smooth beneath her ink-stained fingers. One afternoon, she found a parcel wrapped in brown wool cloth left on the table. Inside was a stack of handmade paper tied with twine, a bottle of ink, and a pen carved from cedar. She turned to find Quentin leaning in the doorway, arms crossed. "I know you said you weren't sure what you were keeping, thought this might help you find out." She stepped toward him, holding the paper against her chest with both hands. "You made this. I asked the tanner in town about the paper. The pen was mine. I carved it when I was a boy." She stepped close, rising on her toes to kiss him. He met her halfway, his hand cradling her jaw, the kiss soft and deep, full of the quiet certainty they'd built between them. That night, she wrote her first page at the desk, the oil lamp casting a golden pool of light across the wood. Quentin sat nearby, reading by the fire, the dog's head resting on his boot. She didn't read the words aloud, but when she finished, she folded the page and tucked it into a drawer lined with dried lavender. Autumn came early, the trees along the creek turning gold before the first frost. They spent the afternoons gathering squash and beans, laying them to cure in the root cellar. One morning, Susanna stood at the chicken coop and said, without preamble, "There's space behind the barn for another room." Quentin looked up from the axe he'd been sharpening. "You thinking what I think you are. I want us to have a home that grows with us." He set the axe down and crossed the yard, his hands closing around hers. "I'd build anything with you." The wedding came quiet, no guests, no preacher. Just the two of them beneath the cottonwood tree, hands clasped, vows spoken in low voices. She wore a dress she'd sewn herself, the hem stitched with a single row of blue thread. He wore his best shirt, the one she'd mended in silence weeks ago. They kissed under the gold leaves, the sky stretched wide above them, and no part of her felt uncertain anymore. That night, Susanna took her journal from the desk and wrote, "I have found the place where I am no longer waiting to be chosen. I am building something with my own hands. And he is building it with me." Years passed. The garden grew deeper, richer. The coop gained a second row of hens. A cradle sat near the hearth, hand carved and sanded smooth, worn soft by use. Quentin carried the little one out at dawn, wrapped in a quilt Susanna had stitched by firelight. He pointed out the ridge, the creek, the fence line that held. Inside, Susanna pulled bread from the oven, her hands still strong, her hair streaked with silver now. She paused by the window to watch father and child walk across the field, the morning sun catching on the tall grass. She stepped out onto the porch, the air cool and clean. Quentin turned when he heard the door, the child balanced easily on his hip. "You're just in time," she said. He smiled. "We always are." And as the wind moved gently through the trees, she walked down the steps and into the life they had made, every step rooted in something true.